In this video, we are going to remove financial uncertainty from your business, not by forecasting the next year, not by building complex models, but by creating a clear financial baseline so you know with calm certainty where the business actually stands right now. Because without that certainty, everything else feels heavier than it needs to. Direction feels unstable, growth feels slightly risky, decisions feel more cautious than they should. Even when revenue is strong, financial clarity isn't about tracking numbers perfectly. It is about removing the background tension that comes from approximation. And that's what we're going to establish here. If you haven't met me properly, my name is Liban, Ask Libs, and I've built and structured businesses myself, and I've been mentored closely by someone who operates at a very high level, someone who taught me to stop looking at businesses emotionally and start looking at it structurally. I've been in many rooms acquiring this knowledge from all sorts of people, and I'm here to show you everything. Before direction becomes clear, before priorities settle, before structure begins to feel useful, there is one area that needs to feel steady at first: your financial position. Not in the sense of analyzing every transaction, not in the sense of complex forecasting, simply in the sense of knowing clearly where the business stands today. Because when that certainty is present, something shifts immediately. Decisions feel lighter, plans feel grounded. The business begins to move with a steadier rhythm. When it is missing, even slightly, it introduces a subtle background tension that affects everything else. Not panic or crisis, but just a sense of needing to monitor. And that quiet monitoring changes how you think. Now, many businesses operate for long periods with only partial financial visibility. Revenues coming in, expenses are being paid, clients are being served. From the outside, everything appears functional. Inside the business, however, there is often a quiet sense of approximation, an ongoing mental estimation of how things are going, a general awareness of income and costs, but not always a precise understanding of what the business truly requires each month in order to operate comfortably. When visibility is partial, the mind fills in the gaps. You estimate future revenue based on your current conversations. You approximate how much margin exists after costs. You make decisions with caution, not because there is immediate danger, but because the exact level of stability isn't fully defined. Even when revenue is strong, there can be a lingering question about how secure that strength really is. This isn't unusual. It happens at every stage. Growth often introduces complexity faster than clarity. More clients, more delivery, more tools, more commitments. Revenue increases, but so does the number of moving parts. Over time, the relationship between what the business earns and what it requires becomes less intuitive. What once felt straightforward begins to feel slightly opaque. And when that happens, financial clarity stops being about reporting and starts becoming about stability. Now, there is a difference between activity and stability. A business can be active and still feel financially unclear. It can generate consistent revenue and still feel slightly unpredictable. It can grow and still require close monitoring. Activity tells you the business is moving, but stability tells you if it can move comfortably. And without stability, everything carries a quiet weight. Because uncertainty, even when it's small, influences every decision. Hiring people feels heavier. Investing in things feels riskier. Expansions feel slightly tentative, not because numbers are bad, but because they are not fully defined. And that is what we're removing here. Not complexity, not responsibility. We just want to implement certainty. Now, without a defined financial baseline, everything remains slightly abstract. You know revenue's coming in, you know expenses are being covered, you know the business is active. But there isn't always a clearly defined point at which the business feels structurally stable. Instead, stability is inferred from activity. If things are busy and clients are paying, it feels like everything's fine. If activity slows, even temporarily, attention immediately shifts to monitoring. This creates a reactive relationship with finances. Stability feels like something that must be watched rather than something that is clearly understood. A defined baseline changes that completely. It moves stability from a feeling to a reference point. Now, the baseline is not about survival. It is about operating calmly. Survival is the bare minimum required to continue. Baseline is the level at which the business runs without strain. That distinction matters because many founders unconsciously operate close to survival while telling themselves they're stable. and the nervous system knows the difference. So we begin with a simple but important distinction. The difference between what the business requires and what it produces consistently. Every business has a minimum level at which it operates without pressure. This includes obvious operational costs, salaries, contractors, softwares, tools, your tech stack, delivery expenses, etc. But it also includes less visible requirements, the ability to absorb timing gaps in revenue, the ability to handle unexpected costs, the margin required to make deliberate decisions rather than reactive ones. And it includes something founders often undercalculate, the realistic level of personal income required to feel stable outside of your business. If your personal stability is unclear, the business never fully feels stable either. So the baseline number is not simply what keeps the business alive, it is the number required for the business and you to operate calmly. Now, once that number is defined precisely, something shifts immediately, because now revenue can be evaluated relative to something real, not relative to feeling. The second piece is consistency. Revenue is rarely evenly distributed. Yeah, some months are strong, some months are lighter, payment lands at different times, projects complete in cycles. A single strong month can create confidence that doesn't reflect pattern. A single quiet period can create concern that doesn't reflect reality. So instead of looking at 1 month, you look at a pattern. What level of revenue tends to arrive reliably? What portion fluctuates? How predictable does the pipeline actually feel? Not optimistically, not pessimistically, just realistically. When you place consistent revenue next to the required baseline, the relationship becomes visible. If consistent revenue comfortably exceeds the baseline, the business moves with ease. If it sits close to the baseline, attention naturally increases. If it fluctuates below the baseline, pressure appears. None of those positions are moral judgments. They are operating conditions. But without defined numbers, those conditions feel emotional. With defined numbers, they become structural. And this is why revenue increasing does not automatically equal stability increasing. Revenue reflects output. Stability reflects margin above requirement. Those are not the same thing. If revenue grows but costs grow equally, then stability hasn't increased. If revenue grows but remains inconsistent relative to baseline, pressure remains. Without a defined baseline, growth feels ambiguous. Revenue rises, but it's unclear how much additional security that actually creates. With a defined baseline, every increase in revenue becomes legible. You can see how much space has been created, how much flexibility exists, what level of investment is supported comfortably. Clarity replaces interpretation, and once that interpretation is removed, financial calm becomes possible, not because risk disappears, but because risk becomes defined. Now, once that baseline is defined, something important becomes visible. The business is always operating in one of these three conditions. Not permanently though, but at any given moment. If consistent revenue sits comfortably above the baseline, the business operates with ease. There is margin, there is flexibility, decisions feel proportionate, investments feel intentional, and a quieter week does not create immediate concern. The system feels stable because there is space between what is required and what is produced. Now, the space is what financial calm feels like. If consistent revenue sits near the baseline, the business operates in a tighter condition, not failing or unstable, just closer to the edge of its requirements. In this position, attention naturally increases. Hiring feels heavier, investment requires more thought, a slightly slower month feels more significant. Now, nothing's wrong here, but the operating condition is different, and pretending it isn't creates distortion. So if constant revenue falls below the baseline, pressure appears, not because the business is broken, but because the requirement is exceeding consistency. In this state, focus narrows, priorities sharpen, attention increases. This is not a moral failure. It is simply a structural signal. The business is operating below its stability line, and when that is visible clearly, it can be addressed calmly rather than emotionally. The key point is this: none of these states define you. They describe the current financial condition of the business. It's not proof of potential. It is simply information. Without defined numbers, these states feel emotional. A slower period feels like something's wrong. A strong month feels like everything is solved. With defined numbers, perception stabilizes. A quieter week can be seen in context. A strong month can be evaluated relative to margin. the mind stops oscillating between confidence and concern because clarity stabilizes interpretation, and that stabilized interpretation is what allows deliberate action, not reactive action. Now, once the baseline is defined and the current condition is visible, something important begins to change, not in the numbers themselves, but in the experience of running the business. A subtle recalculation before decisions are made. None of it dramatic, but it consumes attention. And when attention is consistently divided, it creates background pressure. When clarity is present, that pressure softens. You are no longer estimating where the business stands. You are no longer relying on instinct alone. You have defined a reference point, a visible baseline, a clear relationship between what is required and what is consistent. Decisions that once required cautious mental calculation become straightforward, not because risk disappears, but because ambiguity does. And ambiguity is what creates the most financial tension inside a functioning business. There is a difference between monitoring and orientation. Monitoring feels reactive, checking constantly, reassessing repeatedly, looking for reassurance. Orientation is quieter. You know where the baseline is. You know where revenue sits relative to it. You return to those numbers deliberately, not anxiously. This is where a simple rhythm becomes useful. Not detailed reporting, not complex tracking, just a predictable moment where you revisit the key reference points, the required baseline, the current consistent revenue, the relationship between them. If nothing has shifted, that confirmation takes minutes. If something has shifted, it becomes visibly early while adjustments are still calm. Visibility replaces speculation. Awareness replaces estimation. Over time, this creates ongoing financial calm. Opportunities can be evaluated relative to real capacity. Hiring decisions become proportionate. Investment becomes intentional rather than tentative. A slightly quieter period can be seen in context rather than interpreted as a threat. A stronger month can be understood in terms of additional margin rather than momentary relief. Clarity stabilizes perception, and stabilized perception reduces reactive thinking. There is an also important distinction here. Visible risk is manageable. Undefined risk is exhausting. When you can see the numbers clearly, even if the position is tight, you can respond deliberately. When you cannot see them clearly, the mind fills in the gaps, and what the mind imagines is often heavier than reality. Financial clarity does not eliminate responsibility. It eliminates unnecessary uncertainty. And when uncertainty is removed, attention becomes available for more strategic thinking, direction, priorities, structure, growth. Financial calm becomes the foundation those decisions rest on, not because money is the most important dimension of the business, but because without clarity, everything else carries weight with it. With it, the business moves from a position of steadiness rather than estimation, and that steadiness changes how every other decision feels. So make sure you guys understand you need to keep track of all your finances and make sure you implement a baseline where you are able to have clarity in where your business stands financially. This is so you can make more rational decisions rather than running your business based on emotions. Now, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And if you guys have learned anything, make sure you comment down below, comment any takeaways, and let me know if this has helped you. See you guys in the next one.